Ilara opened her eyes slowly, her vision blurred by the harsh glow of unfamiliar lights. She tried to move, but her body felt stiff, almost as if she had slept for years. She blinked repeatedly, trying to focus, and noticed that she was lying on a smooth metallic floor. The air smelled strange, a mix of cold metal and faint ozone. She could not remember how she had arrived here, or even why she felt an unusual weight pressing on her chest. She forced herself to sit up. Her head throbbed, and a dull ache ran through her limbs. Around her, the room was vast, far larger than any human habitat she had ever seen. The walls curved upward, smooth and polished, reflecting dim light in soft waves. There was no furniture, no familiar objects, nothing she could use to make sense of where she was. Only the soft hum of the air circulation filled the silence. A flicker of movement caught her eye. Shadows danced along the walls, bending unnaturally, as if the light itself had a mind. Her stomach tightened. She wanted to call out, to hear a human voice, but her throat felt dry, and only a quiet whisper escaped. She listened carefully. Nothing responded. No footsteps, no voices, no sound but the low hum. Yet she felt it. A presence. Something closing in. Something alive. Watching her, Ilara forced herself to stand. Her legs wobbled, unsure if they would hold her. She took a cautious step forward. The floor was smooth, but it seemed to vibrate slightly under her weight, like the building itself was aware of her movements. She tried to calm herself. She was a trained explorer, after all. She had survived dangerous missions in unknown terrains, faced hostile planets, and crossed regions of space that no one dared approach. Yet this place, this strange alien structure, unsettled her in ways nothing else had. As she walked, she noticed faint markings on the walls. They were not letters or numbers she recognized, but strange symbols that seemed to glow faintly as she passed. Her curiosity overcame her fear. She reached out to touch one. The symbol pulsed, as if sensing her hand. A shiver ran through her spine. She pulled back quickly. This place was alive. In some way she did not yet understand. A sudden noise made her spin around. A metallic click echoed through the room. She could not see its source. Her heartbeat quickened. The shadows along the walls grew darker, stretching and twisting. Something moved in them, but she could not tell what. She took a careful step backward, then another. Every instinct in her body screamed to run, but there was nowhere to go. The room seemed to stretch infinitely in all directions, walls curving and bending so that escape felt impossible. Ilara tried to remember. She had been on a routine survey mission near the edge of known space. Her ship had encountered a strange energy anomaly, and the last thing she remembered was her vessel shaking violently. She had activated the emergency escape pod. And then, nothing. Hours? Days? She did not know. Time seemed meaningless here. She found herself drawn to a console in the center of the room. It was unlike any technology she had seen. Smooth, dark, and metallic. It had no buttons, no screens, yet strange symbols glowed faintly across its surface. She reached out. The symbols shifted, as if reacting to her touch. A low hum grew louder, vibrating in the floor beneath her feet. Her heart raced. Was this a trap? Or an invitation? She decided to interact with it. Carefully, she pressed her palm against the surface. The console responded instantly. Lights streaked across it in patterns that seemed almost alive. She felt a strange connection, a pulse that moved through her fingers, into her arm, and straight to her chest. A voice not heard, but felt seemed to brush against her mind. She pulled back instinctively. The shadows moved again. Faster this time, creeping closer along the curved walls. She took a deep breath and forced herself to focus. Panic would not help her survive. She needed to understand. She studied the symbols carefully, noticing patterns. Some repeated, some shifted. It reminded her of linguistic puzzles she had trained to decode. Slowly, methodically, she began tracing the symbols with her fingers, moving in patterns that felt instinctive. As she worked, she began to hear faint echoes, like whispers carried on a breeze. At first, she thought it was her imagination, but the whispers grew clearer, almost human. Names, fragments of sentences, warnings. She froze. Could there be someone or something else here? Her mind raced. If this place was alive, perhaps the whispers were its way of communicating. Perhaps it had observed her for a long time. Perhaps the shadows themselves were a part of it. Her exploration led her to a narrow passageway, barely wide enough to walk through. She entered cautiously, keeping her hands on the walls. The hum followed her, growing louder, vibrating in resonance with her steps. The symbols along the walls shifted as she moved, like a living map guiding or perhaps misleading her. The passage opened into a chamber that made her stop in awe. It was vast, the ceiling lost in shadows above. In the center floated a sphere of light, pulsating gently. Around it, the walls were lined with more symbols, moving in waves, almost like a language of light. The whispers grew louder. Elara stepped closer, mesmerized. She felt that if she touched the sphere, if she allowed herself to engage fully, she might understand. But fear held her back. Suddenly, a shadow detached from the wall and moved toward her, faster than she expected. Her instincts kicked in, and she stumbled backward. The sphere's light flared, illuminating the chamber in blinding brilliance. For a moment, she could see patterns, complex circuits, and strange designs etched into the walls, floors, and even the shadows themselves. The whispers became a chorus, not threatening, but insistent. She realized then that the structure itself was alive, observing, learning, responding. Elara's mind raced. She had to survive, to understand, and to communicate, if possible. Fear was natural, but it could not control her. She drew upon all her training, all her experience as a human explorer. She knew humans had survived countless challenges, faced dangers that seemed impossible, and thrived through creativity, empathy, and courage. Maybe this intelligence could be reached not with weapons or aggression, but with the uniquely human qualities she carried within her. She took another step toward the sphere. The shadows recoiled slightly, not in anger, but in curiosity. The symbols on the walls brightened in response to her presence. Her heart pounded. She placed her hands lightly on the surface of the sphere. The whispers rose to a crescendo, and for the first time, she felt understanding, not words, but meaning. This entity, whatever it was, had been waiting for someone who could perceive it, who could approach it without fear. Time became meaningless as she connected with it. She could feel the structure's thoughts, its curiosity, its ancient memories. It had seen countless forms of life, had observed civilizations rise and fall. And yet, here was a human, fragile and resilient, unafraid to engage. The entity pulsed in recognition. Elara understood that this was the first step, the first test. She had awakened it, but now, she had to prove that humanity was more than a threat, that humans could communicate, reason, and create, even in the face of the unknown. A sudden rumble shook the chamber. The shadows pressed closer, and the floor vibrated beneath her feet. She realized that this intelligence was not just aware it could act. The room was closing in, reshaping itself, testing her resolve. She felt fear again, raw and immediate, but also a spark of determination. She was human. She had survived impossible odds before. She would survive this. She would meet this challenge as humans always did, with ingenuity, courage, and curiosity. She backed away from the sphere slightly, observing the patterns and the shadows. They moved with purpose, not randomly. She followed them, mimicking their movements, learning their rhythm. Slowly, the room's aggressive posture softened. The shadows no longer threatened her. The whispers shifted, not warnings, but questions. Elara smiled faintly. For the first time since awakening, she felt a glimmer of hope. She had opened her eyes in a strange and hostile place. Something had closed in around her. But she was still standing, still thinking, still human. And for humans, hope was never lost. Alara moved cautiously through the winding passageways of the alien structure. Every step she took echoed softly. Yet the sound seemed swallowed instantly by the walls themselves. The strange hum that had filled the first chamber now followed her like a living presence, rising and falling in rhythm with her heartbeat. She could feel the building watching, sensing, and perhaps even judging her. The corridors twisted unnaturally, bending and curving in ways that made her feel dizzy. She tried to map the path in her mind, but the walls constantly shifted, creating new routes, closing off old ones. It was as though the structure itself was alive, aware of her every movement, and adapting to her presence. Her instincts screamed that this was a test. But she had learned long ago that fear could be controlled, analyzed, and even used to her advantage. She took a deep breath and pressed forward. The faint glow of the symbols along the walls pulsed as she passed, almost like a heartbeat of the building. She reached out to touch them, tracing their intricate curves with her fingers. Some reacted immediately, flaring brightly, while others seemed to retreat, dimming as if shy. The patterns fascinated her. They were not random. There was a logic, a structure, a language hidden within the glowing lines. She could feel her mind straining to understand, to decode, to communicate. Humans had a unique talent for recognizing patterns, for making sense of the unknown, and she would use it now. As she walked deeper, she began to notice subtle traces left by previous explorers. A faint scratch on the wall, a small mark on the floor, barely visible unless one looked closely. These signs gave her hope. She was not the first human to come here, and perhaps, just perhaps, she could follow their path or learn from their mistakes. She wondered what had happened to them, and a shiver ran down her spine. The structure seemed more than just a building. It felt like a living puzzle, designed to challenge anyone who entered. A sudden flicker of light made her stop. She turned quickly, scanning the dark corners of the corridor. For a brief moment, she thought she saw movement, a shadow that did not belong to her. Her heart rate quickened. She tried to rationalize it. Perhaps it was a reflection, a trick of the pulsing lights. But the sensation of being watched did not leave her. The building itself seemed to shift, walls narrowing subtly, corridors bending inwards. Something was closing in. Alara pressed on, forcing herself to focus. Her training as an explorer taught her that fear was only dangerous if it controlled her actions. She slowed her breathing, observed every detail, and took careful, measured steps. Every curve in the wall, every flicker of light, every shift in the hum of the structure became data she could analyze. She was human, and humans survived because they could think, adapt, and act when others might panic. After what felt like hours, she came to a large chamber. Unlike the first, this one was darker, filled with strange, semi-organic machinery that stretched from the floor to the ceiling. Tendrils of metal and light moved slowly, almost lazily, yet they seemed aware of her presence. Some of the tendrils bent toward her as she stepped closer, stopping just short of touching her. She held her ground, trying to project calm, knowing that sudden movements could provoke them. Her eyes fell on a cluster of symbols etched into the floor. Unlike the glowing symbols on the walls, these were carved deeply, worn by time. Yet they seemed to form a pattern she recognized. She knelt down, tracing them with her fingers. Slowly, she began to see connections, repetitions, a logic to their placement. Her mind raced. Humans had a remarkable ability to solve puzzles, to find order in chaos. She could use that skill now to navigate this chamber. As she worked, she felt the hum shift again, changing pitch and rhythm. The tendrils of the machinery twitched in response to her movements. She realized that the structure was reacting to her understanding, almost as if it could sense her growing comprehension. Her pulse quickened with excitement. This was more than survival. It was communication. A dialogue, without words. Humans had always sought to understand the unknown. And now, She was doing exactly that. A sudden metallic clang echoed through the chamber. Elara jumped back, heart pounding. One of the tendrils had moved abruptly, tapping the floor in front of her. She froze, unsure of its intention. Then she noticed something astonishing. Where the tendril had touched, a hidden panel opened in the floor, revealing a staircase descending into darkness. She hesitated, but curiosity, that deeply human trait, pushed her forward. The staircase led to a lower level, darker and colder than the chambers above. The hum became louder, almost like a voice resonating through the walls. Shadows stretched unnaturally, moving independently of the light sources. She could feel the building shifting around her, closing off passages, opening new ones, guiding her toward an unknown goal. Yet despite the fear, she pressed on, driven by the same curiosity that had always defined humanity's exploration of the stars. At the bottom of the staircase, she entered a cavernous hall, filled with strange objects she could barely comprehend. Some floated, suspended by invisible forces. Others glowed with an internal light, pulsating in time with the hum. The air here felt different, charged with energy she could almost touch. She approached one of the glowing objects carefully. It responded to her presence, shifting slightly as she neared. Her mind raced. Could this be some form of intelligence, communicating in ways beyond human language? She moved among the objects, experimenting carefully. Every action she took elicited a response. A glow intensified, a hum shifted, a shadow twitched. She realized she was no longer merely an observer. She was a participant in a living system. Humans had always sought to connect with the unknown, to leave their mark, to influence the world around them through creativity and understanding. Now she was doing exactly that. A sudden vibration ran through the floor. The chamber seemed to contract, walls moving imperceptibly inward. The shadows along the walls lengthened, creeping closer. Elara's breath caught. The entity, or whatever controlled this structure, was testing her. It was seeing if she could think, adapt, and respond without panic. She calmed herself, focusing on the patterns she had learned, the rhythms of the hum, the behavior of the objects. She moved deliberately, almost dancing through the chamber, responding to the entity's silent cues. Time lost all meaning. Hours or minutes could have passed, she could not tell. The entity seemed to watch her, learning from her, challenging her. She realized that this was a trial, a way for it to understand the humans who had entered its domain, and in that realization, a spark of pride ignited. Humans had always faced the unknown with courage, intellect, and persistence. That same spirit burned within her now. She found herself drawn to a central platform in the hall. Symbols on the floor glowed more brightly here, forming intricate patterns that seemed to beckon her closer. She knelt and traced them with her fingers, feeling the energy pulse through her. For the first time, she sensed something resembling thought or intention. The structure was not hostile. It was curious. It wanted to understand her. As she sought to understand it, a sudden light flared across the chamber, illuminating the floating objects. Among them, she saw traces of previous humans, scraps of material, tools, faint imprints in the floor. They had been here before, and like her, they had interacted with the structure. She wondered what had become of them. The thought made her cautious, yet it also reminded her of the resilience of her species. Humans had faced impossible odds countless times and had always found ways to survive, adapt, and even thrive. She would not fail. The hum rose again, a crescendo that filled the chamber with vibration. Shadows and objects moved in harmony, creating a complex pattern that she instinctively understood. She realized that the structure was teaching her, guiding her, inviting her to participate in its living puzzle. She had no weapons, no technology beyond her own mind and body, yet she felt empowered. Humans were problem solvers by nature, creators by instinct. Her ingenuity, patience, and courage were the keys to navigating this living maze. Elara took a deep breath and allowed herself to fully engage. She moved deliberately, touching objects, tracing symbols, observing shadows. and following the rhythms of the hum. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the chamber responded. The walls seemed to expand, the shadows softened, and a pathway opened toward a distant glow. She realized she had earned the structure's tentative trust. Her actions had proven that humans could adapt, communicate, and reason even with the most alien and intelligent of environments. As she moved toward the glow, she felt a mixture of fear and exhilaration. She had entered this place alone, faced the unknown, and discovered that intelligence and courage could create bridges even between vastly different beings. The whispers she had heard before now seemed to form patterns she could almost understand. The entity, or the consciousness within the structure, was not just observing, it was responding, interacting, learning. She paused at the threshold of the glowing light. The corridor beyond shimmered, almost like liquid, bending and shifting in response to her presence. She realized that the next step could be even more dangerous, more challenging. Yet she also knew that humans thrived in the face of such challenges. Curiosity, ingenuity, and resilience had carried them through millennia. And now, in this strange alien world, those qualities would guide her forward. With one last deep breath, she stepped into the glow, ready to continue her journey. The hum followed, the shadows shifted, and the structure seemed to lean closer, almost expectantly. She was not just surviving, she was engaging, communicating, proving that humans could meet the unknown with intelligence and courage. The trial was far from over, but she was ready. Elara moved forward, the light enveloping her, the hum resonating through her very bones. She had awakened something, and now, the journey into the heart of the living structure and the secrets it held was only beginning. She knew that whatever lay ahead, she would meet it as a human. Thoughtful, courageous, and unyielding. Elara stepped into the glowing corridor, her senses alert and her mind racing. The light enveloped her, warm yet strange, pulsing in rhythm with the hum that had become almost a companion. The walls curved gently, bending in ways that seemed alive. The air shimmered, and she could feel the presence that had been closing in on her since she awoke. It was no longer distant, it was here. Near. Aware. As she moved forward, she noticed the glow shifting in patterns, forming shapes that resembled a language but not one she could read. Her mind struggled to interpret it, yet instinctively, she understood its rhythm, its logic. The structure, or the entity within it, was attempting to communicate. It was testing her, measuring her reactions, and assessing her intelligence. Elara realized that the trial she had sensed since her awakening was now at its peak. She advanced cautiously, her feet making no sound on the smooth floor. The corridor widened into a vast chamber, unlike anything she had seen before. Tendrils of light stretched from the ceiling, moving slowly, as if alive. Shadows shifted and twisted along the walls, forming shapes that almost looked like faces but not threatening ones. They watched her. The glow of the symbols pulsed brighter as she approached. A sudden vibration ran through the floor, stronger than before. The tendrils quivered, and the shadows contracted slightly. Elara's heart raced, but she did not panic. She had learned in the previous chambers that fear was her enemy, understanding was her ally. She observed the patterns, tracing the rhythm of light and shadow, following the logic of the pulses. Every movement she made seemed to elicit a response. The structure was alive, interacting with her, testing her resolve, her intellect, and her courage. In the center of the chamber floated a sphere of pure light, larger than any she had seen in the previous room. It hovered silently, pulsating with energy. As she stepped closer, she felt a strange pressure on her mind, a sensation of being observed, examined. Her first instinct was fear, but she forced herself to focus. Humans had survived the unknown countless times, not through strength alone, but through reasoning, empathy, and adaptability. She would rely on these qualities now. Elara raised her hands slowly, hovering just above the surface of the glowing sphere. The air vibrated, and the shadows on the walls seemed to stretch toward her. She realized that the entity within the structure was aware of her intent. It was testing not her strength, but her ability to understand, to communicate, to reason. She spoke aloud, softly, though she doubted the entity could hear her words in the usual sense. "I am human," she said. "I mean no harm. I wish to understand you." The sphere pulsed brighter, and for a moment, the chamber was bathed in intense white light. Alara closed her eyes against it, and when she opened them, the sphere seemed to shift. It was no longer just an object. It felt like a presence, intelligent and aware. She sensed thoughts brushing against her mind. Not words, but emotions, impressions, and ideas. Curiosity, caution, recognition. The entity was alive, and it was trying to understand her as she tried to understand it. Alara took a deep breath and reached out again, touching the surface of the sphere lightly. The pressure on her mind intensified, but it was no longer threatening. Instead, it was almost like a conversation. She felt patterns, memories, and knowledge flowing, faintly and carefully, into her awareness. She realized that this was a bridge between her consciousness and the entities. She could perceive it, and it could perceive her. Humans had always sought to connect, to share understanding, and she was doing exactly that. Suddenly, a wave of motion swept through the chamber. The tendrils of light writhed and stretched. The shadows along the walls twisted faster, and the floor vibrated with a low, resonant hum. Alara stumbled backward, but she steadied herself, refusing to retreat in fear. The entity was reacting strongly now. It had been patient, testing her slowly, but this was a direct challenge. She had to prove her intelligence, her courage, and her capacity for reasoning. Her mind raced. She could not fight this presence physically. She had no weapons, no tools beyond her own understanding. But humans were creative problem solvers. She began observing patterns in the light and shadows, noting repetitions, sequences, and rhythms. She mimicked them with her movements, touching the sphere and tracing the symbols on the floor in harmony with the pulses. Slowly, deliberately, she aligned herself with the entity's logic. The vibration of the floor shifted, and the intensity of the light diminished slightly. The shadows no longer lunged toward her but moved in measured arcs, almost as if acknowledging her understanding. She could feel the entity's curiosity, now mingled with something she recognized as respect. It was learning from her as she learned from it. Humans had always survived not because they were the strongest, but because they adapted, observed, and engaged with the unknown in ways no other species could. She was demonstrating that truth now. Alara stepped closer to the sphere, letting her hands hover above it without touching. She focused on her breathing, on the rhythm of the chamber, on the logic of the pulses and shadows. Slowly, impressions of thought began to form in her mind. The entity seemed to be conveying information not in words, but in feelings, memories, and patterns. She glimpsed visions of civilizations long past, of beings that had entered this structure and never returned. She sensed curiosity, caution, and intelligence, but also an inability to understand fully the human mind. Her pulse quickened. This was the moment humans had always thrived in. Facing the unknown directly, using intellect and intuition to bridge gaps that seemed impossible to cross. She focused all her mental energy, matching the entity's rhythm, responding to its queries with subtle gestures and movements. The shadows softened further, the light pulsed in welcoming patterns, and she felt a strange harmony form between her and the entity. The sphere shifted slightly, and the air around her seemed to hum with recognition. For the first time, Alara sensed a faint echo of communication, not a one-way flow, but a true exchange. She felt her thoughts brushing against the entity's awareness, and it responded in kind. Curiosity, observation, understanding. She realized that this was the breakthrough she had been seeking. Humans had survived countless unknowns because they could reason, empathize, and engage creatively. Now, she had proven it to this alien intelligence. A sudden flare of light illuminated the entire chamber. The tendrils of light coiled upward, forming shapes that resembled human figures, fragile, resilient, and determined. Alara's heart leapt. The entity was reflecting her nature back to her, recognizing the essence of humanity: courage, creativity, and the will to understand. The whispers she had heard since awakening now seemed coherent, forming patterns that matched her thoughts. She was no longer alone. She was communicating across the boundaries of species and intelligence. The floor vibrated again, but this time it felt like an invitation rather than a threat. A pathway opened ahead, glowing softly. Ilara understood that she had passed the test, at least partially. The entity had acknowledged her intelligence and intent. It was willing to allow her to continue, to explore deeper into its domain, to learn more. Yet she also sensed a warning. The next steps would be more challenging, requiring even greater understanding and courage. Ilara's mind filled with determination. Humans had survived impossible odds, faced hostile worlds, and overcome dangers that seemed insurmountable. Her ingenuity, patience, and adaptability were her weapons here. She had proven her ability to reason, to empathize, and to communicate with an intelligence far beyond ordinary comprehension. She had earned a measure of trust. She stepped forward onto the glowing pathway. The hum resonated in her chest. The shadows moved gracefully along the walls, and the sphere pulsed in quiet approval. She was aware that the entity could change, could challenge, and could test her again at any moment. But she also knew that humans survived by facing the unknown directly, by engaging with it thoughtfully and creatively. That was her advantage, her strength, and she would use it fully. As she advanced, she noticed traces of previous humans who had entered this domain. Faint imprints in the floor, discarded objects, and markings that had been left intentionally. Some had succeeded in communicating partially, others had failed. She understood now that the entity had been testing not just her, but all humans. Her role was to bridge the gap, to prove that humans could meet intelligence with intelligence, reason with reason, and creativity with creativity. The chamber widened further, revealing a space that seemed infinite. Tendrils of light stretched to the ceiling. Floating objects hovered mid-air, and the shadows now moved in a coordinated dance. Ilara realized that she was no longer merely a visitor. She was a participant in a living system, interacting with it, learning from it, and shaping it in turn. Humans had always made their mark, not by force, but by understanding and ingenuity. That mark was now forming here, in the heart of this alien structure. The sphere pulsed one final time, brighter than ever. A faint warmth filled the air, and the shadows receded slightly, giving her space to move. She understood that she had earned the entity's trust and curiosity. She was allowed to continue, to explore deeper, and perhaps to communicate fully. Yet she also knew that the journey was far from over. Challenges lay ahead, requiring intellect, courage, and the uniquely human trait of curiosity. Ilara paused for a moment, letting the realization settle in. She had confronted the unknown directly. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and intelligence far beyond her comprehension. She had proven that humans could reason, adapt, and communicate in ways no other species could. And now, she was ready for the next step, ready to explore further into the heart of this living structure, to uncover its secrets, and to continue the story that humans had begun so long ago. With renewed determination, she stepped forward, letting the glowing pathway guide her. The hum resonated through the chamber, shadows danced along the walls, and the sphere pulsed rhythmically in quiet acknowledgement. She was not just surviving, she was engaging, communicating, and proving the resilience, ingenuity, and courage that defined humanity. Ilara's journey into the entity's domain had reached a turning point. She was no longer just an explorer. She was a participant in an unprecedented exchange between human intelligence and alien consciousness. The challenges ahead would test her further, but she was ready. Humans had always faced the unknown, and they had always endured. She would do the same, and perhaps she would leave a mark that would be remembered not just by humans, but by the intelligence she had awoken. Ilara moved forward on the glowing path, her senses heightened, her mind alert. The pulse of the entity resonated in her chest, a rhythm she now instinctively understood. She had passed the first trials, proven her reasoning, her courage, her uniquely human ability to observe and adapt. Yet she knew the journey was far from over. The deeper she went, the more complex the challenges would become. She could feel the entity waiting, testing, deciding if she could truly meet it on equal terms. The chamber ahead opened into a vast hall, larger than anything she had imagined. The walls shimmered with flowing light, moving patterns that seemed alive. Shadows stretched across the floor, but they no longer felt threatening. Instead, they moved in harmony with the pulsing glow, forming intricate designs that seemed to convey information. She realized that the entity was not just alive, it was a consciousness capable of thought, observation, and perhaps even emotion. Humans had always sought to connect with the unknown, to reach beyond themselves, and now she was in the midst of a living intelligence that demanded that connection. Ilara stepped cautiously toward the center of the hall, where a massive sphere hovered silently. It pulsed gently, casting light that made the shadows dance like living beings. She could feel its awareness, vast and deep, probing her mind, sensing her thoughts and intentions. Her pulse quickened, but fear no longer held her back. She had learned to engage with the entity, to match its rhythm, to respond thoughtfully. Humans had survived the unknown, not by brute force, but by understanding and communication. This was her moment to prove that humanity's ingenuity and courage could bridge the divide between species or between forms of intelligence. She lifted her hands slowly, letting them hover just above the surface of the sphere. A warm pressure filled her mind, an impression of thought and curiosity. Almost like a silent greeting, the sphere seemed to lean closer, sensing her intent. Ilara took a deep breath. "I want to understand," she said softly, though the words barely mattered. The entity responded to thought, not language. She focused on her consciousness, opening herself fully to the connection. For a moment, the chamber was filled with a brilliant white light. Shadows retreated to the walls, and the tendrils of light floating above twisted gently in what seemed like acknowledgement. Ilara felt a rush of impressions, a flood of information, histories of civilizations, memories of beings who had entered and failed, glimpses of knowledge long lost. She realized that the entity had observed countless forms of life, learning, analyzing, and perhaps even judging. Yet here she was, a single human, fragile yet determined, engaging with it on equal footing. The pulse of the sphere intensified, and the air around her vibrated with energy. The entity tested her further, presenting visions of impossible scenarios, challenges that seemed beyond comprehension. She saw worlds on the brink of destruction, civilizations collapsing, and intelligence failing to adapt. Her mind raced, analyzing each scenario, understanding patterns, and finding solutions. She felt a strange exhilaration. This was what humans had always excelled at, facing the unknown and finding order, reason, and hope where none seemed possible. Suddenly, the chamber shifted. Walls moved imperceptibly, tendrils of light coiled around the edges, and the sphere pulsed brighter. Ilara felt the presence of the entity pressing more strongly, probing deeper into her mind. It was testing her resolve, her courage, and her ability to think under pressure. She steadied herself, breathing slowly, focusing entirely on the patterns, rhythms, and responses she had learned. She would not falter. Humans had survived impossible odds because they could adapt, think, and persist. This was no different. Her hands brushed the surface of the sphere lightly. A surge of energy ran through her, connecting her thoughts to the entity's awareness. She felt the intelligence exploring her mind, not to harm, but to understand. She responded in kind, projecting her own thoughts and reasoning outward. She shared impressions of humanity, curiosity, resilience, ingenuity, and empathy. She showed the entity that humans were more than fragile bodies. They were thinkers, problem solvers, and creators capable of shaping the world around them. The sphere pulsed again, and the tendrils of light extended toward her, forming shapes that resembled human forms. The shadows along the walls shifted into patterns of movement she recognized from her own past. Her training, her experiences. She realized that the entity was mirroring her understanding back to her, testing not just her intellect but her ability to inspire recognition of humanity's strengths. Humans had always been defined by their ability to connect, to reason, and to leave a mark on the unknown. Now, she was proving that fact to an intelligence beyond human comprehension. A sudden vibration ran through the chamber, and a deep resonance filled the air. The entity seemed to be asking a question, presenting a choice. Alara felt a weight settle in her mind, an impression that she could advance further, but only at a cost. To continue, she would have to give a part of herself, a fragment of her consciousness, to merge with the entity. The thought was daunting. She hesitated, feeling the magnitude of the decision. Yet she also understood that humans had always achieved greatness by taking calculated risks, by offering trust in order to gain knowledge and understanding. She drew in a deep breath and made her choice. Slowly, deliberately, she extended her awareness toward the entity, allowing a part of herself to merge with its consciousness. She felt the pulse of the sphere respond, the tendrils of light coiling around her like gentle hands. The shadows shifted and danced, now forming patterns of acceptance and recognition. The entity was no longer testing her, it was acknowledging her as an equal participant in its awareness. Humans had survived the impossible because they could reason, empathize, and create. Alara had proven that truth. The chamber transformed. Walls expanded, tendrils of light moved gracefully, and the shadows formed shapes of human explorers, beings who had come before, now honored within the structure's awareness. Alara realized that the entity had preserved the memory of those who had entered its domain, learning from them, and now learning from her. She felt a profound connection, a merging of understanding, as if she were a bridge between humanity and an intelligence far beyond her own species. She stepped forward, her movements in perfect harmony with the entity's pulse. The sphere hovered before her, now a radiant beacon of connection and knowledge. The chamber seemed alive, responding to her thoughts, her curiosity, and her courage. She could feel the entity's awareness expanding through her, and through her, she could perceive the structure as a living, learning being. Humans had always sought to explore, to understand, and to create connections. She had achieved that now in a way no other human had. The air shimmered with warmth, and the hum reached a soothing resonance. Alara felt a sense of completion. Though she knew her journey was far from over, the entity had accepted her, acknowledged her humanity, and allowed her to participate in its consciousness. Yet she also sensed opportunities ahead, more knowledge to gain, more understanding to achieve, and more ways for humans to leave their mark. A pathway opened, glowing faintly, leading to the exit of the chamber. The sphere pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat, and the shadows along the walls formed a gentle arch, as if guiding her forward. She understood that the entity was offering her safe passage and the chance to carry what she had learned back into the wider universe. Humans had always been explorers, seeking to understand and to expand their horizons. Now, she could do so with the blessing of an intelligence that had observed countless forms of life and deemed humanity worthy. Alara walked forward, each step steady and confident. The pathway led her to a chamber filled with soft light and a view of the stars beyond. She could see her ship in the distance, still intact, waiting for her. She felt a rush of relief and joy. She had survived, communicated, and triumphed. Humans had always faced the unknown with courage, ingenuity, and resilience. She had proven that once again. Before stepping into her ship, she turned to look back at the glowing structure. It pulsed gently, as if acknowledging her presence, her courage, and her understanding. She felt a deep respect for the intelligence she had encountered, a recognition that humans could leave a lasting mark, even in the most alien of environments. She realized that her journey had not just been about survival, it had been about connection, understanding, and the unique qualities that defined her species. Alara stepped onto her ship and activated the systems. The glow of the structure faded gently, yet its presence lingered in her mind. She felt a fragment of its consciousness now within her, a reminder of what she had learned, and of the intelligence that had recognized humanity's value. She knew that the experience would change her forever, and that the universe held countless more mysteries waiting for humans to explore. As her ship lifted from the surface, she gazed at the stars, stretching infinitely before her. She felt pride and awe. Humans had survived impossible odds countless times, not by being the strongest, but by being adaptable, intelligent, and courageous. She had demonstrated those qualities, and in doing so, she had earned a place in the memory of an ancient intelligence. The unknown was vast, but so was humanity's capacity to meet it, understand it, and thrive. Elara settled into the pilot's chair, her mind racing with thoughts of the entity, the structure, and the knowledge she now carried. She knew that this experience would guide future explorers, that the lessons she had learned would illuminate the path for humanity. She felt a profound sense of accomplishment, not just for herself, but for her species. Humans had once again proven that they could rise to the challenge, face the unknown, and leave a lasting mark. The stars stretched endlessly before her, a reminder that the universe was vast and full of mysteries. Yet she felt ready. Humans had always been explorers, thinkers, and creators. She had faced the unknown, engaged with intelligence far beyond her comprehension, and emerged triumphant. And as her ship soared through space, she knew that humanity's journey was far from over. There were more challenges ahead, more mysteries to solve, and more opportunities to prove that humans could thrive where others might fail. Elara exhaled, a sense of peace settling over her. She had opened her eyes in a place of fear and uncertainty. Something had closed in around her, challenging her at every step. Yet through courage, intelligence, and determination, she had overcome, communicated, and triumphed. She realized that this was the essence of humanity, facing the unknown with hope, creativity, and unyielding spirit. As the stars stretched into infinity, Elara smiled. She had survived. She had learned. And she had proven once again that humans could rise above fear, adapt to the unimaginable, and leave their mark upon the universe. The journey was far from over, but she was ready. Humanity had endured, and humanity would continue to endure.